Welcome back. Today I wanted to talk about a research article that was published, I believe, back in August. But it's really neat. It's on one of my favorite groups, the Dytiscids, which are the Predaceous diving beetles. And this study has come out of Antwerp, Belgium, University of Antwerp, and it's very interesting. It's really cool if you're into biological control or diving beetles or really entomology in general. As a reminder, please like and subscribe, leave some comments. It helps me out a lot. At the end, I will talk about some books that you can get into if you're interested in predaceous diving beetles, some of the ones that I have found useful. But first, let's talk about this research article. It's called Exploring the Efficacy of Predaceous Diving Beetles as Potential Nature-Based Solutions for Combating the Invasive Mosquito Aedes albopictus. And this is particular to invasive mosquitoes in Europe. Although Aedes albopictus is something that is already in the United States and Canada, as kind of some background information. So if you're not familiar with these two insects, this is Aedes albopictus. This is the Asian tiger mosquito, and it is extremely invasive and extremely annoying. This arrived, it arrived into North America, I want to say back in the 80s. Maybe it was a little earlier than that, maybe a little later. But I believe it came in on the tire trade. So recycled tires are a big trade, and they tend to harbor water. So as ships were going around from port to port carrying these wet tires, they filled up with these mosquitoes in Asia, and then they were brought over to the US. And now they're pretty much, I believe, in every state and in Canada, and they are very annoying. They're easy to diagnose. You've probably been bitten by these before if you've been in the States. They are large mosquitoes, as you can kind of tell from this. The farther north you go, I believe, the bigger they get. So in the south, they're large. In Maine, they're huge. So they're also striped, hence the name tiger mosquito. They have these stripes all over their body. Personally, having been bitten by many mosquitoes, these are the ones that hurt me the most. When these bite, you know you've been bitten because they give a nasty pinch. And you feel very, very itchy. But the bigger issue with them is that they are really good carriers of viral diseases. So they spread things like Zika and chikungunya and dengue fever, things like that. So countries are very interested in controlling them. Primarily, right now, it's done through chemical control, but no one really wants to have to keep spraying pesticides all the time. So this study was looking at biological control techniques. Probably the most common biological control / insecticide control, depending on what they're using, for this mosquito is Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, which is a bacterium a Bt bacterium that produces a insecticide crystal inside of it that is particularly lethal to flies. And mosquitoes are flies, so sometimes this bacteria or this toxin, depending on what they're using, is dumped into like swamplands or streams, things like that. The problem being that it can affect more than just this one mosquito. And there are many, many kinds of flies and mosquitoes in these swamplands and stuff, so you don't really want to do that. There are other biological control agents that are predaceous, but this particular study was looking at predaceous diving beetles, which are my favorite insect. So I love collecting these guys. I love studying these guys. These are Dytiscids, Dytiscidae, and they are aquatic, as you can tell from this picture. They spend almost their entire life in the water, although the adults do fly readily in order to disperse, and the larvae pupate on land. They all have, well, I shouldn't say all because there's a ton of them, but they generally have this extremely frilly, fringed hind leg. They are voracious predators. They are very, very fast swimmers, and they are freshwater. Generally, they prefer still water to like rapid moving water, but you can find them in most freshwater environments. And more interestingly, they are also fans of reproduction in temporary water. So like after it rains, like in the trenches on the sides of roads, or in little pools, or even in things like cups that are thrown off onto the side of the road, or pollution that's kind of built up a waterlogged area, these guys will reproduce in. There are lots and lots of species of these. They're super fun to collect. You need some aquatic nets, or you can do like black lighting on the side of lakes at night, which is pretty fun to collect the flying adults. You can also build traps out of old soda bottles and bait them with cat food. All of these beetles are meat eaters, so they will sense the kind of fetid meat in the water in the old soda bottles that is the cat food, and they will swim in there and eat it, and then they'll get trapped in the soda bottles. So there's a lot of ways to collect these guys. Some of them are extremely colorful, some of them are extremely large. This study generally focused on some of the smaller ones, but they do get pretty large. I believe the biggest genus is biggest as in size-wise, is Cybister. They can get up to 2 to 3 inches in some areas. I think the Asian ones are bigger than the American ones, but the American ones can still get 1.5 inches or 2 inches. But there are also very, very small ones as well. This study also looked at a group called the Notarids, which are kind of like the Dytiscidae, but really small, and they have this big fin on their stomach, on their sternum, and so they're fairly easy to diagnose. They're not nearly as specious. But anyway, what these researchers were looking at is, could you use the native species of Dytiscidae, of these predaceous diving beetles that are already present in Europe, to selectively attack these mosquito larvae, because mosquitoes reproduce in water, generally in still water, which is where these beetles also hunt and reproduce. Specifically, if you could find beetles that were really good predators for these mosquitoes, you could potentially artificially breed them and release them into areas where there's a lot of mosquitoes in order to drive the mosquito population down. And they did a really good job of this. So they looked at 29 species of Dytiscidae, and then and 1 species of Notarid, and from that they did a series of selection trials where they kind of starved them, and then introduced them to these Aedes albopictus mosquitoes to see if they would eat them. And then once they knew which diving beetles were hungry for mosquito larvae, then they did additional tests. So the additional tests were things like they wanted to see if they would eat the mosquitoes instead of eating other sorts of fly larvae or copepods or things like that. So then they could narrow it down further and further. What are the best predators for mosquitoes? So if they did this for both the adults and the larvae, if you've so this is what an adult Dyticid looks like. More adult Dyticids here. This is what a larval Dyticid looks like. They are voracious predators. This one here is feeding on a mosquito larva. So this is what a mosquito larva looks like while it's still in the water before it develops wings. And this is the Dyticid beetle larva. They have these enormous pincer-like mouthparts. They can inject digestive enzymes directly into their prey and then suck out their juices. They usually have these little Urogampi Circe-like appendages on the back, and they're not great swimmers because they're just all legs, but they are voracious. They eat an enormous number of invertebrates in the water. The larger ones are capable of hunting fish, like small minnows and things like that. So they're very, very good predators. The downside of working with these in a research environment is they're also cannibalistic. So the adults won't feed on each other, but the larvae will because they're soft-bodied. So you have to handle the larvae individually. You have to keep them all separate, or else they'll begin eating each other. Whereas the adults don't really bother each other. They just kind of swim around. So they did these tests in order to, they did these feeding experiments. Would they eat the larvae? But they also counted if you just killed them, because we don't care if you eat them or kill them. If you kill them all, it's the same as if you ate them. And then they did prey choice experiments. Would they prefer the Aedes albopictus larvae over other mosquitoes, or over other flies, or over crustaceans, like microscopic crustaceans that are in the water? And then they found out which species were the best at that, which species were really good at habitat overlap. Would these species live in the same areas that the mosquitoes would live in? And eventually they came to the conclusion that the best one is called Agabus bipustulatus, which is this guy here. So they did test a lot of these kinds of, this is called Agabus. You can't even see that writing. I'm a fool I'll make it darker. This particular beetle is called Agabus bipustulatus. I don't want to spell that all out. But these are fairly small Dytiscids, but they did find that the Agabus genus, they tested a number of these, that this whole genus was actually really good at hunting mosquitoes. They really liked the mosquitoes. They lived in a lot of the same places as mosquitoes. They're particularly good at living in like small cups of water or trashy heaps on the sides of roads that collect water that the mosquitoes will infest, and they breed really fast. So these are a number of Agabus beetles. This first one here is bipustulatus, but there's a number of different Agabus beetles. They're all fairly small. This is what the Agabus larva looks like here. And the larvae are pretty big, but they did find lots and lots of different Agabus were good at hunting these mosquitoes. There was a number of other species. They kind of lined them up in kind of rank order of which species were the best feeders. So some of them killed 100% of the larvae. Some of them weren't interested or only killed less than 20%, things like that. So it was very, very interesting. And then they had one notarid, which is right here, Notaris clavicornis, which is not a great hunter for these. Notarids tend to be really small, so maybe only the largest notarids could even hunt the smallest mosquito larvae. And they were using 4th instar mosquito larvae, so they were fairly large mosquitoes. So you would want some of the larger. You would need a predator that was kind of larger than the mosquito to make much of a difference. But they did find a number of species that were really good. So they narrowed it down to 10 species that were identified for further study. A lot of them were Agabus, and then Hygrotus was another one that was pretty common. And they did these series of tests. And then eventually they decided, actually, there's some really good data here that we have, that we know that these Agabus, especially Agabus bipustulatus, would be a good or a potential biological control agent. And the benefit of using this Agabus is that it is already native to Europe. So the issue then becomes, so you will know it fits into the environment. A lot of times with biological control research, you need to do host testing to make sure that the biological control agent that you're using, which is a predator or a parasite or a parasitoid, won't affect other species that you don't want to kill. So you want them to be pretty host specific. These predators are not host specific, but they're already in the environment, so you don't need to worry so much about what else they're going to feed on. They already fit into the European ecosystem, so it's not as big of an issue. The bigger issue with these is that rearing Dytiscids is a major problem. Because they are voracious predators, the larvae here are cannibalistic. You have to take special care with rearing them. They also muddy the water quite a bit in that because they're eating so much, you end up with a lot of like rotting fluids and rotting carcasses and things like that. So you have to be careful about keeping the water clean. Another issue is that you need to have an environment that's both aquatic and terrestrial, because the larvae are aquatic, but right when they're about to pupate, they crawl up onto the land and kind of burrow themselves in the mud. So they need a space where they can pupate in peace. So you need, fresh, soft mud that's not getting too filthy or washing into the water, things like that. So no one has really figured out a great way to rear these in huge numbers, especially on the commercial scale that you would need for long-term biological control of something like a mosquito, an invasive mosquito. But it's really cool. They haven't replicated this in the wild. So that's one of the major criticisms of this, is that this study is specifically did all of this in the lab, in an insectary in Belgium where they could actually rear all of these out. You would need to do a lot of these tests in the wild to make sure that there's not confounding factors, because sometimes how an animal acts in a lab is not the same as how it will act in its normal environment. So would it still prefer the mosquito larvae over other things? Because in the environment there's a lot of things for it to be eating. Would it still target the mosquito larva as heavily as it did in the lab? But overall, it's a really cool article. I will link this article in the description. This article from Neobiota, if you want to give it a read. The other thing I wanted to talk about were books if you were interested in working with Dytiscids or collecting them or learning some more about them. The first one that I would recommend if you're a beginner is, or the one I would recommend if you're a beginner, is Diving Beetles of the World. You can usually get this, you can get it anywhere online for the most part. You can also get it frequently at like Barnes & Noble or something. It is a smaller book, so this is it. Maybe 300 pages or so. Almost 300 pages. It's not super expensive. I think this one was like $30, $40, something like that when I got it. But that was years ago. And it will get you to the genera. So it will get you to a genus, no matter where you collect your Dytiscids in the world. And it has a lot of biology information. So like their life cycle, some information on collecting, stuff like that. It's a pretty good book. If you are in North America and you are really into Dytiscids, the best book that you can get is this one, Predaceous Diving Beetles of the Nearctic Region. This book is unfortunately out of print. You can still get it, but it is very expensive, and it will have to be shipped to you. I think mine had to be shipped from either Russia or Poland or something. It took forever to get. It is a huge book. Thousands of pages. 1,000 pages? Yeah, 1,000 pages. But it contains all of the species in the United States and Canada. And there are a lot of them. There are thousands of them. And it will help you. It will identify to the species level, including like what regions, where in a lake you'll find these, or which lakes in northern Canada these have been collected and stuff like that. It's really, really good. Really expensive, hard to get, but if you are really into water beetles, like I am, then this is a great book. But it's only good for North America, unfortunately. But if you have other recommendations for books for other parts of the world, let me know in the comments, because I'd be interested in looking at them. But until then, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.